Now, this high frequency oscillatory ventilation has fascinated all the intensivists, whether they deal with the newborns, pediatric, or the adult population. But is it the magic remedy? Is it the panacea that all of us are looking for when we face a child with a difficult ventilation? So to solve all our questions and all our queries, we have a very eminent neonatologist, extremely experienced and knowledgeable, Dr. Mangala Bharti. Dr. Mangala Bharti is a professor of neonatology at Madras Medical College, Chennai, and he's also heading the Center of Excellence at the Institute of Gynae and Obs, Chennai. He has been a research guide of many DM neonatology students and has many publications to his credit in national and international journals. He has special interest in healthcare technology, neonatal resuscitation, and human well banking and research methodology. He has been a busy researcher and he has many famous trials under his belt. So I will now invite Professor Mangala Bharti to shed light on this very interesting topic and enlighten the audience. Dr.
Thanks,
Mangala, please.
thanks, ma'am, for the kind introduction, and thanks, Akash, for the opportunity. From whatever information I could collect from Akash, if my understanding is right, so we do have a group of primarily neonatal fellows who are trainees in neonatology and a few clinicians here in this group. So let me start sharing my slides. Okay, so do you see my slide?
Yes, Dr. Mangala, we can see your slides.
So a little apologies upfront. So it has been a long day. I didn't realize this day is going to be this much busy because I made a commitment to Akash long back. But unfortunately, I didn't realize that this is the same day of the KMC National Conference. So being part of the group and the whole day lecture series were running simultaneously. Also, again, we had the Lakshya national level inspections somehow were scheduled for today. So that was also a busy day, just sitting in my clinic, just finished my clinic. So I'm just saying this only just to make sure that, so I don't want to fall asleep. So I'm sure that there are a lot of young and bright minds here around will definitely keep me awake through their interactions and questions. I think the time allotted to me is 45 minutes. So what I'll rather try to do more is that I'll try to dwell more on the very basics of high frequency ventilation. Things like, okay, so even if people who are there in this group, if you have not used high frequency even once, totally new to this concept, I'm pretty sure that so this is a very elite group and many of you maybe even experts in doing high frequency ventilation. But still, if there are a few people who are beginners, so no worries. So we are just going to focus more on the very basics of high frequency ventilation. And let's discuss more the concepts behind high frequency. And maybe towards the end, let's discuss a little bit of evidence for high frequency. But that's not going to be my area of interest. I'm pretty sure you people are all good in reviewing evidence nowadays for any intervention. So I'll keep that reserved for discussion if necessary. So I'm repeating again, the focus is on the very basics of high frequency ventilation. Okay. So I think first of all, why do we need, first of all, don't we have enough modes of ventilation? It looks like one of the favorite questions for both for examiners as well as for the trainees. In an examination is a discussion on the various modes of neonatal ventilation. So, so the number of ventilatory modes available keeps increasing every day. So when a ventilator provides so many modes of invasive ventilation, I talk about a baby who requires invasive ventilation. And is high frequency just another mode? So we all know definitely not. In that case, and we know for sure that usually most of the machines which deliver these various, even these advanced modes, they're not capable of delivering this mode called high frequency ventilation. And why so? That means so we have to especially buy these machines separately, high frequency machines apart from more conventional ventilators. Do we need to do that? And so what is so different about this mode of ventilation? The primary reason why we have been toying around the various different modes of ventilation and what is evolving for a period of time is definitely that so we all have learned over a period of time, especially after having burnt our fingers over a period of time, that so ventilation is it's a double-edged sword. No doubts, mechanical ventilation, invasive ventilation saves lives. It's a very important tool in the hands of a neonatologist. At the same time, so as we are doing this intervention, this positive pressure ventilation to an extremely immature lung or a diseased lung, invariably we end up causing a secondary damage to the lung just because of this very process of trying to provide support to the lung. I think that's what we call as ventilator-induced lung injury. The various mechanisms by which an invasive ventilation brings injury to the lung is well known. All of you would have be very good in. You might have written at least. This is again a very favorite theory question as well. Ventilator-induced lung injury. Just only if this flow chart is drawn, then it is done. It's all that repeated repetitions. So the various components of ventilation. Just the mere presence of an endotracheal tube, the foreign body, the biotrauma, and the repeated opening and closing of a diseased lung, so electrotrauma, and the damage caused by the flow, the pressure, the volume, whatever we deliver. I just would like to bring focus on only to one thing. Of these various traumas that we know about, see, the Rio trauma, the barotrauma, volume trauma, biotrauma, electrotrauma. The most one important factor, I can even say the most crucial factor of all these of late seems to be the volume trauma. So if you are delivering higher volumes, means if, or I'll say if you are not operating upon optimal volumes for the baby most of the time during your neonatal ventilation, so we definitely end up damaging the alveoli. And it is not pretty easy. So even though there are some, we can easily say that this is the tidal volume for a given baby. So some calculations based upon the formulas and all. These are more easier said than done. To identify and to have the capabilities of constantly delivering the so-called optimal volume for a given lung is very, very challenging. So that's why the volume trauma still remains a major factor when we talk about ventilator-induced lung injury. These all various different modes of ventilation, along with so everything. The primary targets are only these three. So if you want to prevent this lung injury, what do we need to do? Or especially if you want to prevent these various traumas and volume trauma, especially, the first and foremost, so we should be most of the times the many alveoli would have not got recruited. You will be having a heterogeneous component. The FRC, functional residual capacity, will be very low. So you should recruit the lungs. That means you should establish functional residual capacity. You should keep the alveoli open at the optimal state. And during most of the various the ways of invasive respiratory support, it's quite possible that soon after recruitment, again the alveoli go for de-recruitment. That's a very crucial step. So we should have a way of making sure that after recruiting the alveoli, we need to make sure they're not going back into de-recruitment. They should remain recruited. Subsequent de-recruitment should be prevented. But these two steps should be done without causing over distension. So it's a very fine zone. So we all know, so this should be a very familiar graph to all of you. So there is only a very small zone here. Okay. So the zone below is about the lung condition where the most of the lung is yet to be opened, lung remains in a state of de-recruitment and atelectasis. But if you use a little bit more pressures or a little bit more volumes, then you may end up in a zone of overdistension. So the whole crux lies on ventilating the baby in the so-called safe zone, optimal zone, so neither de-recruitment nor overdistension. So that is where this mode of ventilation, high frequency ventilation, so going by its very basic fundamental principles, is very appealing to a clinician. So literally, what do you mean by high frequency ventilation? So when we say high frequency, we are talking about respiratory rates which are supraphysiological. We know the physiological respiratory rates. So multiples of the physiological respiratory rates we are going to use. So ultimately, we are worried about what we call as the minute ventilation, right? How much amount of, what is the volume of gas that moves in and out of the lungs per minute. So we all know minute ventilation is a product of respiratory rate and the tidal volume. So we say that of these two factors, the respiratory rate and the tidal volume, so we've been repeatedly saying that we are more worried about volume trauma. Okay, but we need to deliver a particular minute ventilation. So this is a whole concept. It's a little reverse. Means we are going to use the product has to remain the same. The product of respiratory rate and the tidal volume has to be the same. Has to reach the same number minute ventilation. So we bring down the tidal volume to very small levels so that the trauma because of tidal volume is prevented, and we compensate by increasing the respiratory rate to a very high number. So that's why we even don't use the term respiratory rate. We know that we are talking in terms of hertz. So whenever we say 1 hertz, that is equal to a respiratory rate of 60. So as it is a very high rate, whenever we talk about high frequency, we talk only in terms of a hertz. So, okay. So usually something starting from 3 hertz. That will be around 180 and more on, going up to even say 18 or 20. Hardly we go beyond 15. So that is the usual range in which we operate. When we mean by a very small tidal volume, just remember that actually we are talking about tidal volumes that are much smaller than even the dead space of the respiratory apparatus. So this is what I was telling to you about. So the characteristics of high frequency, the basic characteristics, we are operating on a very, very high rate, talking in terms of hertz, somewhere between 3 to 25. That means 1 hertz is 60 breaths. The second component is very important. Okay. So if you're going to use such a low tidal volumes, so obviously we need to have some kind of a continuous distancing pressure, something like CPAP. So that is the second important component. So this is not a variable component. Both during inspiration and expiration, we are going to deliver a continuous descending airway pressure. And superimposed on that continuous airway pressure is going to be the small tidal volume, which are typically less than the anatomical dead space. In the most classic example of high frequency, what we call as the high frequency oscillatory ventilation. So we'll reach there. We'll discuss the various types of high frequency soon. So as these tidal volumes are very, very small, it's still possible that expiration can happen passively. But if you want a high frequency ventilation to be more effective, because it's better, especially when you have to wash out the CO2 well, it's better to have the expiratory phase also actively, and so which is not there in a conventional mode of ventilation. So some types of high frequency, especially the high frequency oscillatory ventilator, has got an active expiratory phase. So this ventilation definitely is not a newer mode. This is there available for decades, and actually this has been inspired only by nature. So the hummingbird and the panting of the dog are typical examples. I think just look at the way this dog breathes, and just hear this sound. Just Okay, I think that's enough. So see, you just see that there doesn't seem to be a significant inspiration and expiration. The dog breathes at a very, very high breath continuously. And the sound is just akin to the sound of a high frequency oscillator running. But still, the dog is able to achieve the gas exchange. So this is just to, I think, to show or prove the point that so this mode of ventilation is quite possible. It exists in nature. So people have tried replicating successfully in the form of high frequency ventilators. So let us just look into what happens at the alveolar level. This is an electron microscope picture of alveoli, so of a diseased lung. Let us see what happens when we keep on increasing the PWP. We all know the importance of PWP. So now we are starting with the PWP of 0. So okay. As the PWP, as we start increasing the PWP slowly, see now you just see more and more alveoli slowly starts getting recruited, right? The number of alveoli that are remaining open are increasing over a period of time. But still what happens is during inspiration, that's good, but still a lot of alveoli are getting de-recruited at the end of expiration. This is a typical conventional ventilation, what happens. So as we keep increasing the PWP, recruitment takes place, the things are getting better, but still the alveoli are not remaining open. So only when we reach a significant amount of PWP, we now see so most of the alveoli remaining open, and we don't see much of a de-recruitment happen. So that's what simply this principle is only being utilized in high frequency ventilation. So this is what happens in high frequency at the alveolar level. Just see, sorry. So we are applying a constant distancing pressure. So throughout respiration, both in inspiration and expiration. So the alveoli remain open. They're all getting recruited. Most important thing, they're not getting de-recruited. And there are superimposed some kind of vibration kind of things on the open alveoli, just like these alveoli are all vibrating. And that seems to be enough to achieve an amount of gas exchange, which we can achieve through a conventional ventilation. Okay. So if we are able to deliver such a kind of very small tidal volumes and a continuous descending pressure, at least by the principles, let's get to the clinical benefits, whether they are real or they just only there as a concept, we'll get there later. But at least by principles, just by the concepts, this is what we want to do, right? We want to operate at very, very small levels so that the tidal volume trauma is negated. And obviously, this good descending pressure helps us it facilitates lung recruitment. And throughout the respiratory phase, this recruitment remains without going in for de-recruitment. And obviously, there is no over-distension as well. Okay. So some of you might be wondering, again, this is a theoretical question, a favorite question. So, okay, tell me the methods by which are the physical principles by which gas exchange happens in a high frequency ventilation. So, so the names are what to say. People get worried remembering these things, the various names, but the concept is very, very simple. So whether you, I'm not worried if you don't remember the names of the various mechanisms, but if you understand the principles, so what do these names actually mean, that is more than enough. So what happens in a conventional ventilation? So conventional ventilation is a combination of these two factors. So the first and foremost is what we call as this bulk convection. So by which from a higher pressure to lower pressure, we develop a negative pressure within our lungs with the help of our pleura. So this pressure difference causes a bulk movement of air from the environment. We are sucking in actually, nobody is pushing air, it's negative pressure breath. So the air moves into the lower respiratory system. But even in the lower respiratory system, So there is a significant amount of diffusion that is happening for gas exchange. Convection is only that the air can be taken into the lower respiratory system. But what happens in the lower respiratory system? Diffusion means it's a concentration. We know the meaning, very simple meaning of diffusion. Like it means what to say, the exchange of molecules from a higher movement of molecules from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So within the alveoli, we do have a higher amount of CO2 and less amount of oxygen, that of an expired gas, whereas the inspired gas has the reverse, more oxygen and less carbon dioxide. So oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange, we're not talking about an exchange which happens inside blood vessels. When we mean diffusion, this is happening within the alveolus per se. So at a molecular level, molecular diffusion. So bulk convection and molecular diffusion are the two main mechanisms by which gas exchange takes place in a conventional ventilation. But when we talk about high frequency, there are many mechanisms, so even beyond the 6. And but these are the most well described ones. Bulk convection, asymmetric velocity profiles, Pendlev effect, Taylor dispersion and turbulence, molecular diffusion, and collateral ventilation. So let us see. See these the various mechanisms, they operate at different levels in the airway, starting from the proximal as we move towards distal. We'll come back to this slide once we understand. First, let's talk about these mechanisms in depth. So we know what is a conventional bulk flow, right? Just means just like a bolus of bulk, just in conventional ventilation. So how can this happen in high frequency as well? Yeah, looks like it's quite possible, and only to the very few alveoli which are situated in close proximity to the major airways. So there it looks like, even though the tidal volume is very small, people believe that a few alveoli which are very, very close to the major primary airways may just get ventilated because of convection. So this is okay. Let's move to the most important ones. So what do we mean by a Taylor dispersion? So Taylor dispersion is you just when we want to mix up two things, just imagine like a bowl which is filled with water, and just imagine just you are taking an oil. You have to mix an oily substance. Let's say it's colored also, something like a red or blue, whatever it is. So if we are using it, using a syringe to inject this substance into water, that means we are trying to, if we're doing it with force, with velocity, what happens? Obviously, whenever it's something like this, right? So if the movement is slow, it will take a head like this one. But as the movement becomes fast over a period of time, whenever you apply more pressure, so you get an arrowhead like of thing. So what is the advantage of this arrowhead? So you create an arrowhead gets created whenever the movement is very fast in this direction, and once the movement stops, then there is a lot of mixing of these two, this arrowhead and so just imagine this arrowhead is the inspired gas, and it penetrates the exhaled gas or the gas which is rich in carbon dioxide. So what are the simple advantages we are creating just by this process? The amount of surface which is available for mixing. So, if you look into this, so what is the surface area? Just imagine this in a 3-dimensional way. So this is surrounded by this amount of air, but what is the interface available here? So there's a very small interface available for mixing up of these two gases. But just by doing this, just because of as we are using a higher velocity, so it generates an arrowhead-like thing, and the moment you just withdraw, that means when it enters, this is inspiration. The moment it goes for expiration, there is a complete mixing happening. So that's what we call as a laminar flow with a lateral transport by diffusion. Okay, that is what the Taylor dispersion is all about. And then there is a little difference between Taylor dispersion and the asymmetric velocity profile. So almost again, we start with the same concept. So whenever you are trying to push something, so with speed, you give velocity, obviously, so the movement takes the shape of an arrowhead, right? That's what we discussed here, the same thing, interior dispersion. So, but the moment, okay, if when expiration is also active, or when just it goes back, it is not always like this. So, as this keeps on happening repeatedly, when it goes back, before the next breath starts, before the next arrowhead starts, a small proportion of the tip of this arrowhead actually still remains in that motion. Only this portion of the arrowhead goes back. So leaving behind the tip of the arrow, which continues to travel in the forward direction. So in other words, so with continuous repeated, just imagine in pulses, some arrowheads keep on coming, and the end of that arrowhead alone gets detached. It keeps moving, even though the most of the arrow comes back. The end of the arrowhead gets cut off, which keeps moving. So ultimately, what happens over a period of time is that so we do have two different velocities. That's what the name simply means: asymmetric velocity profile. So the gas in the center keeps on traveling forward, most of the gas in the forward direction. Whereas as the velocity of the gas is much less in the periphery, so that allows the reverse movement of the gas. So something like in the same tube, this is just, these are two are not different tubes. This is just for illustration, look like there are two tubes. This is one single tube, that's an airway. Within that, there is a central gas which moves in a higher velocity, it moves forward, whereas in the lateral part, the velocity is slow, and then that facilitates a reverse movement. So two different velocities in two different directions happening in the same place simultaneously. That's what we mean by asymmetric velocity profile. Okay, pendulet effect, very simple. This happens even in conventional ventilation, but it's very helpful in high frequency. So all the alveoli will not have the same time constant, size of alveoli will be different. So when we do have two different times at which for inspiration the TA is different, so obviously the alveoli with a shorter TA so gets filled with the air, with the gas fast. So whereas the other alveoli, this one which with a longer TA is still in the phase of inspiration, so there will be movement of gas from this alveoli to the other alveoli. So during inspiration itself, just because this has already reached its TI, it has moved into TE, whereas the other alveoli remains still in TI. So that's why this movement of gas keeps happening. That's what we mean by a pendulum effect. And lastly, this is again the same principle what we discussed in conventional ventilation. It's the concept of a molecular diffusion and collateral ventilation. So like molecular diffusion is just concentration gradient dependent. The moment you reach the lowest spot of airways, it's just like the oxygen concentration, CO2 concentration of the inspired and the expired gas are different. So obviously, as the concentration gradients are in two different directions, the exchange happens in that direction. And we know about the spores of Kohn, things like that. So where there is a scope for some connections exist between adjacent alveoli that help in collateral ventilation as well. So this is what we are talking about in total. See, high frequency ventilation creates a lot of turbulence. So what is the advantage of this turbulence first? That helps in better mixing. You just imagine that you just need to mix up two things, that's all. So you can, when you want to mix two things up, conventional ventilation is something like, just at least remember this example. You have two different liquids for two different colors, two different jars. You want to just mix up these things well. So you can just keep pouring one against the other. You can empty the jars one into the other. That's one way. That's something like conventional ventilation, what we're doing. But the other way is just simply, you can just pour one on the top of the other, then just use a spoon and just keep stirring it. So that's stirring effect. There is no bulk movement, just like in conventional ventilation. But this stirring movement, what we create with the help of a spoon, again helps us in better mixing. So just a quick recap. Proximally situated alveoli can get ventilated by just by bulk convection, and so once we come down a little bit further, so this radial mixing, that's what is called as an Taylor dispersion. So the arrowhead, which helps us, and some part of the arrowhead keeps traveling. It is not the whole arrowhead doesn't come back. That's what we call as an asymmetric velocity profile. These two are the major mechanisms. Of course, we do have the pendulum effect because of the varied TIs of different alveoli. And of course, the molecular diffusion and a collateral ventilation happening at the alveolar level. So I don't think you will have any difficulty in writing the various mechanisms or trying to explain these mechanisms to somebody else. Let's now move to the ventilator per se. So far, we have understood why we need this, why high frequency by design is a much is very lung protective compared to conventional ventilation, and so even though we are using a very what to say non-physiological kind of ventilation, does it achieve gas exchange? Yes, it achieves. We do have examples in nature, and also we have the explanations, the various mechanisms by which this gas exchange is explained. So the various mechanisms that we just discussed about. Let's now just come into the kinds of the machines. So how do machines deliver these kinds of drug? So first and foremost, this is the design of a conventional ventilator, right? So we do have a flow which goes to the patient, and we have in valves sitting in the expirator limb, inspirator limb, Y, and the expirator limb, right? So the expirator limb has a valve which generates both PWP as well as the PIP. The valve has two positions: expiratory position, inspiratory position. The valve opens and closes. Yeah, we all know that. So conventional ventilation, the same mechanism also can be used to deliver high frequency ventilation, but it's not a real high frequency. It's a kind of high frequency, we can say. So just all that we need is what? We need to generate very high rates, right? So if the valve can open and close to that height, normally let's say we operate at a rate of 60, that means this valve opens and closes 60 times. So if the same valve can open and close 200 times, 300 times, something like that, but obviously this it will be limited. There will be limitations. Valves are not so good compared to other mechanisms. This is what we call as a high frequency positive pressure ventilation. So simple positive pressure ventilation where high rates are used just by utilizing the same valve which is present in the ventilator. That is called as a high frequency positive pressure. There are still ventilators available in the market which make use of this technology, even major players. I'll show you. Okay. The other method and the most typical or a classical example of very effective high frequency ventilation is this high frequency oscillatory ventilation. So what do you mean by high frequency oscillatory ventilation? So just in the same circuit, we do have a machine which has got most of the time it's a piston, and sometimes it's a diaphragm, like the diaphragm of a speaker. So whenever the piston keeps moving, rotating, as the dial rotates, this piston moves up and down. So as the piston move up and down, obviously, so this makes changes in the gas. So the number of times the piston moves gives that rate. And whenever the piston pushes down, gas moves towards the patient. When the piston moves in the other direction, so it just sucks air from the system. So this is the typical high frequency oscillator. Okay. So we don't have these machines, especially at least in India. So they're not widely used. But still, we need to know these types. So what do you mean by the high frequency flow interrupter and high frequency jet? More or less they're the same. We do have here, we need an additional ventilator circuit, right? This is the, when we talk about high frequency oscillator, that's only one circuit. This is part of the circuit per se. It's not a separate, you don't see two circuits here, right? There's only one circuit. The circuit has an inbuilt piston which is moving up and down in the circuit itself, right? So whereas when we talk about a high frequency flow interrupter or a high frequency jet, we do have a conventional ventilator circuit by which we can deliver conventional ventilation. But we have some mechanism which is superimposed, an additional circuit which is connected to this one. So where you can use a jet nozzle kind of thing to generate just like pulses, keep on injecting pulses of gas, smaller volumes, which get superimposed on this flow. That is a high frequency jet. Or the other option is that you can just use just imagine something like a wheel, so which causes interruption of the flow, multiple interruptions of the flow. So that means it converts a streamline continuous flows into chunks of flow. It breaks down this stream into small chunks at a higher velocity. That's what we call as a high frequency flow interrupting valve. This valve is a separate one apart from the PIP and PEEP. Okay. So we do have, okay. So the main difference, so this is the only mode of ventilation. So where you just, the piston moves in both the directions, right? So when the piston is moving towards the patient, it is inspiration and it's pushing gas in. And the piston is moving away, obviously it creates a negative pressure and sucks. So both inspiration and expiration are active in high frequency oscillator ventilator, whereas that is not the case in the other modes of high frequency ventilation. We'll get into the other things later. So these are some of the common, so your unit may have, I assume, to my knowledge, these are the machines which are used commonly here in the Indian neonatal units. So see, said that the most typical high frequency oscillator. So Sensormedics, there are two models, 3100E and 3100E. So you may have one of these two models. So this is a standalone high frequency oscillator. That means you can't do any conventional ventilation in this machine. It's a pure oscillator. You can give only high frequency ventilation in this one. Okay. So again, yeah, a little complicated machine only in terms of circuit. There are so many components with so many functions. And this is not a very hi-fi machine in terms of we don't have any graphics in this machine, no displays, but a very effective machine and a very reliable machine for delivering high frequency. Okay. So some of you might be using the Drager. So this is the Drager 8000 plus, the previous model. It does have high frequency ventilation. You just see shown here, HFV mode is available. And this is the advanced version. So VN500, again from Drager. Okay. We do have SLE, both 5000 and 6000 machines, which are capable of providing high frequency. But most of these, all these machines, Drager, SLE, they're all capable of providing both conventional ventilation as well as high frequency ventilation, unlike the Sensormedics one. That's the advantage. And so I'm not sure whether you have worked. I have worked. This is was available in PJ when I was there as a resident. So from Stefan, the Sophie machine. It's a very good oscillator. Yeah, and the Fabian one. So I think the Fabian has been acquired by the Sensormedics. It's part of the Sensormedics brand now. So Accutronics, Fabian. So just let's spend just a minute or two trying to understand. You see all these machines listed here, almost whatever I had shown you. So we have the Sensormedics. We have the Drager, two types of Dragers, Babylog Plus and VN500. SLEs, 5000 and 6000. The Fabian and Stefan. This, I'm not sure whether it's available in India. It's used mainly at the Leone Plus. So what are the basic principles by which they work? That you need to know. This first is very, very important. So only these two machines, Sensormedics and the Stefan Sophie, they have a proper piston and a diaphragm. The piston, they have a piston. Whereas the Fabian has only a diaphragm. So this is interesting. So Drager, even though is a very major player, when you talk about ventilators, it still works on the principle of they rely a lot only on they're still the same valves. So, but that valves, special types of valves, the solenoid valves are capable of moving in a very, very high speed. So the solenoid valves and the expiration, it is not a true active expiration which is happening in Drager, but they are using a Venturi system. So somehow something like a pseudo passive kind of, I don't know what's the right term to use, but still the expiration is somewhat passive. They have a Venturi which helps in expiration, making the expiration a bit active. SLE has a different principle, again something akin to Drager only, but they don't have a valve at all. Rather than using a valve, so they do have a rotating valve jet. That means the valve itself is being, there are two different kinds, because this rotating ball creates jets in both the directions. So that the one jet opposing another acts like a valve. So how do you just, what does the valve do? the valve obstructs the flow, right? Mechanically, you do have some physical thing which is obstructing the flow. That's what we call as a valve. But SLEs don't have anything there physically. There is no valve. Just they're creating a flow in the other direction. So the flow which is coming in the reverse direction is going to obstruct the flow for a precise amount of time. That's what we mean by rotating valve jet. It's a very unique mechanism of creating a valve movement. So that can be operated at a very, very high frequency. Fine. So some idea about the differences or the mechanisms by which these machines create these high frequency. And so most of them operate in this the range which we are comfortable with. And I talk about amplitude. So this is a draggers have some limitation definitely, because they're especially Baby Lock Plus. So it's always the amplitude is a percentage of the peak output of the pressure. It is influenced a lot by the pressure in which you're operating. In simple terms, if you're operating on very low maps, so you may not be able to generate higher amplitudes in dragger, especially only when you're operating on low pressures. But that is not the case in the other types of ventilators. This is a little bit, just note that we all of you should know what is a bias flow, right? That means bias flow is the flow which is flowing continuously throughout the ventilator, independent of the flow which is used for generating a breath, what is given during a breath, right? So this, apart from the flow which is being used for generating high frequency oscillation or whatever it is, high frequency ventilation. So your Stefan and Fabian are the only two machines which do have a mechanism of a bias flow. So, okay, maybe we'll discuss this later if people are interested in knowing what is the role of a bias flow and do we make use of it really in clinical practice. Okay, so we have finished. So we have looked at the various companies, products available in India. So the difference in the mechanisms by which they generate this high frequency ventilation. Let's now move into the clinical practice. So how do we really play around with this machine? So relatively, compared to conventional ventilation, the knobs are few. It's very straightforward. So all that we said that high frequency is all about just like CPAP, we are going to deliver a continuous distancing pressure. So that is the mean airway, what we call as a mean airway pressure. So that's number one. So then we are going to superimpose some, vibrations. You saw that electron microscopic picture, right? Alveoli. So alveoli distension, mean airway pressure. Then the vibrations has to happen. So the vibration has got two components. So what are the two components? So one is that the number of vibrations happening. That is obviously the frequency, the rate of these vibrations. And what is amplitude? So what is the movement? Just imagine, okay, just have a look at my hands. Just high frequencies, like if conventional ventilation is something like that, the alveoli remain open, close, open, close. We talk about high frequency, just open up the lung and then superimpose these oscillations. The number of these hand movements is the frequency. The amount, okay, of how much hands move. So this is the amplitude, okay, or the magnitude, we can say, to a certain extent of these vibrations. Okay. So obviously there will be an inspirated time and an expirated time. Bias flow only in, I said, two machines. FiO2 is an individual component. So primarily we're talking about some pressure, mean airway map, frequency and amplitude. And there is an FiO2, of course, the item. So this is what happens here. So there is a mean airway pressure, which is continuously delivered. And around the mean airway pressure, the oscillations happen. So up and down in this direction. So these number of oscillations per second obviously is going to give you the rate. And what is amplitude? The amount, whether it moves less or moves more. That is amplitude, obviously. Again, this is a very peculiar feature and a very interesting feature of high frequency ventilation. See the components of this ventilation which influence oxygenation and CO2 elimination are fairly they are decoupled. That means in a conventional ventilation, whenever you just keep adjusting any pressure, if you handle PIP or if you have handle PWP, obviously that will make a change in delta P. So that will influence both the mean airway pressure. Change in mean airway pressure is going to influence oxygenation. The change in delta P is going to influence your carbon dioxide elimination. So always it affects both these components. Whereas in high frequency, these are totally different. What we say, they're decoupled. So the parameters, mean airway pressure and FiO2 and the inspirated time are the parameters which affect oxygenation. Whereas amplitude and frequency are the two parameters which are which we touch whenever we want to when we talk about CO2 elimination. So that's what it said. Oxygenation and carbon dioxide elimination have been demonstrated to be decoupled in high frequency ventilation. Okay. Okay, so now we have learned the various knobs in these ventilators and what do they do? Which knobs do we need to touch? Whenever we want to play with oxygenation, remember only mean airway pressure and FiO2. Hardly we touch the TA, only two parameters, MAP and FiO2. Whenever we want to play around with the CO2, so it's the amplitude and rarely the frequency. That's it. Very simple, right? So now, okay, so how do we practically make use of, in which situations it is useful? Are there any strategies in utilizing these various parameters? There are many strategies. The most common indications for bringing in high frequency still or severe, we still, there are very few units in the globe who have a lot of experience, who have a lot of faith in high frequency, who still continue to use high frequency as a principal mode. But that number is very, very few and limited. So most of the units bring in high frequency only as a rescue mode. So whenever we talk about RDS, it's a very severe form of RDS, or whenever a conventional ventilation fails, you're not able to, you require very high pressures to maintain oxygenation and CO2 elimination as a rescue. And typically in conditions like congenital diaphragmatic hernia, meconium aspiration, BPHN. So there are only certain limited conditions where we use more of high frequency ventilation. Okay. So we talk about strategies. Just remember these two or three terms. Like we do have something called as a high volume strategy, and there is also called as a low volume strategy. And people are more comfortable nowadays in using the term optimal volume strategy. Always when there is high and low, there will be something called as an optimal volume. Okay, because the lung conditions that we are dealing with may be homogeneous, heterogeneous. They may have a lot of air leaks and atelectasis. PPHN component could be there. So simply, what do you mean by this high volume strategy? So when we say high volume strategy, we just want to start. So when we're moving from conventional ventilation to this high frequency ventilation, we are going to start with a higher mean airway pressure compared to what was the pressure that was being delivered through the conventional ventilation. Let's say the conventional ventilation map, when you calculate using the formula, was something like around 10. So now you'll be starting something like 12. So somewhere 1 to 3 centimeters higher than that of the mean airway pressure that was there in conventional ventilation. That is the typical high volume strategy that we start. And so low volume strategy obviously will be the reverse. There actually will be starting with pressures a little less, 1 or 2, less than what was delivered in the conventional ventilation. So in most of the situations, like a severe form of RDS, even in bad meconium aspiration syndromes, PPHN, we'll be starting with, whenever the recruitment is a problem, obviously we'll be starting with a high volume strategy, because that is the one that the whenever primary reason for utilizing high frequency is to bring in a better recruitment, obviously we'll use a high volume strategy. And the second, the reverse strategy or the low volume strategy is more preferred whenever you are dealing with an air leak. When there is an existing air leak and you are bringing in high frequency, you think high frequency will be a better modality to deal with an air leak, then obviously we don't want to aggravate the air leak. So we will be starting with the lower pressures, the low volume strategy. Okay. So what is optimal volume strategy? How do we find the optimal map? we'll get there. I'll just show you, there are various suggestions. How do you find the optimal mean airway pressure? So we know where to start. Either you start, depending on the underlying lung condition, you're going to start use either a high volume strategy. In most of the circumstances, you at least in case of Harley, consider a low volume strategy. Okay, and frequency. Most of the time, so you will be operating frequency somewhere between 8 to 15. And just remember this: in bigger babies, term babies, we are going to use a low frequency. In smaller and preterm babies, we are going to use a higher frequency. I'll just tell you why in a subsequent slide. That's what we do. And the third component, amplitude. The way we set amplitude differs. So it's some numbers in some ventilators, it's a percentage in some other ventilator. But you just adjust the amplitude so that you get good what we call as the wiggles, right? Chest movement. The vibrations that are happening has to be seen up to the level of umbilicus. The whole of the chest and the upper abdomen. Up to the level of umbilicus, you should be seeing vibrations happening. The wiggling should be happening. That is the right amplitude that we are in. But remember, there's always a relationship between these MAP and amplitude. Okay? So usually the amplitude in most circumstances is something like double that of the MAP number, what we say MAP. And the reverse is also true. The MAP will be something like half of your amplitude. To give an example, let's say I'm operating on a mean airway pressure of something like 12. So something like 24, around 25 will be the amplitude. That will be the most suitable one. So what you need to remember is that if whenever actually this relationship is disturbed a lot, or when you think that when your amplitude is moving to something, if you require an amplitude of 3 times that of the MAP and all, then you need to rethink your strategy. That may have may not provide you adequate gas exchange happening. Okay, so we know where to start with the pressures. We know what is the frequency. Simple numbers, choose the numbers between, depending on the size of the baby, term or preterm. Amplitude just good enough to bring in wiggling, good amount of wiggling up to the level of umbilicus. Very simple. Okay. So this is a slide. This is a method that is recommended. It's a bit complex method. Looks like some people do use it to people practice to bring in what they call as an optimal volume strategy, rather than using just going by numbers, high volume and low volume. You are doing an experiment to find out what is the correct amount of mean airway pressure for this baby, to start high frequency ventilation. So there you use, see, this is a point of de-recruitment. You try to give higher pressures, keep on, then to reach the maximal recruitment. Then you bring down the pressures again, and then then you reach a point here, CD. Then okay, from that point onwards, then you move upward. So just look at what people are doing here. So you just start with the pressure. We know the saturation targets may be, let's say your saturation target was 95 to 97 for a given baby. So you start with the lower saturation. You start with the pressure that will be good enough to have the FaO2 and the pressure that will be required to achieve a saturation of only 86 to 94. Then keep on increasing the pressures 1 to 2 centimeter levels every 2 to 3 minutes, until the saturation improves. That's where then you will be able to identify what is the opening pressure. Keep on increasing to the point where the saturation stops falling, or the FaO2 is less than 0.25. So you have an idea about the maximal pressure that reaches the total lung volume. Then you start coming down in the same steps until the saturation starts falling. Okay, then that will give you an idea about closing pressure. So that's from then you just go 2 centimeters above the closing pressure. So you are doing an experiment to assess what is the likely opening pressure of this lung. So what is the maximum pressure that's likely to reach a total lung volume? Then what is the closing pressure? These 3 points. Okay, opening pressure, maximal pressure, closing pressure. So once you identify this point, then you just go up 2 centimeters above this pressure, and that's where most likely that has to be. But this is hardly practiced in real life. So only for those people who are interested in experimenting, I just brought this slide. Most of the time, you just take up either a simple high volume strategy or a low volume strategy. Okay, this is just to show why we are using these different frequencies in term and preterm. So this is something has to do with the resonance, basic resonance of the lung. Every structure, every object has got its own resonance. So these are the resonance. So a preterm HMD lung has a resonance at this level, this frequency, whereas a meconium aspiration lung or a term lung has got a resonance in this area. That is the reason why you are using different frequencies in that. Okay, so this is where we start. I just give you some idea about what are the pressures to use, how frequency and amplitude has to be handled. But after we start, what we need to do? So okay, we'll be just doing obviously an X-ray to see that expansion. So we need an optimal inflation. So neither if there is a derecruitment, obviously we need more pressures. If X-ray is showing hyperinflation, that means you have to come down on the mean airway pressure. You will be doing a simultaneous blood gas, just X-ray and blood gas, right? How do we interpret and what do we do? So if we have an inadequate oxygenation and X-ray showing atelectasis or a poor lung inflation, what does that mean? The lungs are not yet open, you have to increase the pressures slowly. Rarely people consider using sustained inflation also for a short time. Okay, the situation is like that, your oxygenation is not good, but the lung is overexpanded. So with or without hypercarbia, what does it mean? You need to come down on the pressures. Right. So obviously that could be the reason why the oxygenation is not happening well. You have normal lung volumes, but more CO2 retention, you have to increase the amplitude or decrease the frequency, but hardly don't touch the frequency. Operate on, just stay with increased amplitude. The reverse is true. More CO2 washout, that means decrease the amplitude. Hyperoxia, first decrease FiO2, then maybe you can think about pressures. If the chest is not moving, most likely there could be a plug, or think about conditions like chest wall edema. Okay. A few just practical points. As much as possible, try doing away from suctioning in high frequency, because that is one important thing. Just this simple process of suctioning, and especially post suctioning, the lung goes for a de-recruitment. It takes a long time for the recruitment to happen again, and we have to do sustained pressures or some more, what to say, side breaths in between to achieve recruitment. So unless it's really necessary, so avoid suctioning as much as possible in high frequency. You need to use an excellent humidification. The large volumes are used, your humidifier has to work fantastically. How frequently you need to do blood gases when a baby is on a ventilator? Maybe in the first 12 to 24 hours, till you just, when you need to find out what is the kind of pressure that you require. So when you want to have a good understanding of the lung, you will require frequent gases, say something like even sometimes so once in 1 or 2 hours also. But the moment you do understand the lung well, you can move it to 4 to 6 hour intervals later. No role for paralysis, so don't use paralysis. Auscultation hardly helps in a baby on a high frequency. You won't be able to hear anything by auscultation. And IME breaths, it's optional. It's not necessary that IME breaths are mandatory. Especially we'll be using it only when the lung goes in for frequent de-recruitment following procedures. Yeah, chest movement alone is a good indicator of, as far as amplitude is concerned, we can go with chest movements as a good indicator. Okay, these two are new kids on the block. Like now we have the new machines. We know the role of volume guarantee or the volume targeting. So combining high frequency with volume targeting. So obviously this is have been shown to be beneficial in terms of, at least there are no major clinical benefits as of now, but high frequency with volume guarantee has achieved better CO2 controls compared to high frequency alone. And a lot of interest in delivering this high frequency through the nasal interface. And so just that is an option where when you think that somebody is failing non-invasive ventilation and they have to be intubated, so you can consider nasal high frequency ventilation if it is available. So there are queries, I'll just talk about it later. And I think maybe as we are running out of time, rather than going through the actual evidence, so the evidence is, these are the various areas of interest for as far as a clinician is concerned. So do we have evidence for these questions? So like what? High frequency, is it better compared to conventional? What kind of high frequency, how does it fare? These various kinds against each other. Do we need to use a primary versus rescue, early rescue versus late rescue? Various disease condition, how does it work? And so do we, what is that, which strategy is better? Optimal lung volume recognition, high volume, low volume strategy. So what is the point of weaning or exit? And of course, the use of adding volume guarantee or volume targeting to high frequency and all. Evidence on high frequency is actually really very limited. And so I'll just show only the summary slides for you. Okay. So in a nutshell, when you talk about using high frequency versus conventional ventilation for preterm babies or severe, reasonable amount of evidence is only comparing elective high frequency ventilation against conventional ventilation. But even in these 19 trials, most of the trials are in the pre-surfactant era or the early surfactant era. There are very few studies that have been done recently. So, but there is some small benefit in terms of chronic lung disease, or when you look at as a combined outcome of CLD and death, and some decrease in ROP rates as well. But there are higher IVH, PVL, and REX. So, and even that advantage is not found in rescue. So, even though the evidence is for elective high frequency, in where there are benefits, both benefits as well as drawbacks. So, most of the conclusions, there's meta-analysis and systematic reviews, they do say we do not have enough evidence to recommend or replace conventional ventilation as the primary mode of ventilation. And as I said already, the most common practice is still rescue is the preferred mode compared to elective type of ventilation. That is the evidence that what we have. And take homes, okay. So rather than take homes, just I'd like to conclude with this message. See, rather than focusing on the type of ventilator, so we do have many options, many ventilator modalities available. Consider high frequency also as a ventilatory strategy rather than the kind of ventilation. So it is not like that this ventilator will be the best, high frequency will be the best, or a conventional ventilator will be the best. So rather than taking that approach, so what we need to do is that, okay, for the given baby, for the given kind of lung condition, and I have experimented already with one kind of ventilation, you know what are the limitations that you are having in that method. So what will be the best ventilatory strategy for achieving a better gas exchange in the given baby? So that is primarily decided by the patient features and the disease characteristics rather than the machines per se. So try to understand your patient more. So understand when we mean the patient, that's the condition of the lung, the disease characteristics, and the type of ventilator can only enable or constrain your knowledge of application of the ventilator strategy. So don't get too much involved with machines. Most important is your clinical strategy and how you make use of these machines in a given patient. Akash, I think I'll stop here. Maybe that other slides I'll skip. If people are interested, maybe I'll make use of the slides when answering the questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mangala, for a brilliant talk. I think it will be beneficial for all those who are just about to begin high frequency, and also equally beneficial for those who are already into it. So as you rightly said, that please be comfortable with whatever ventilation you are using. Don't be bogged down with the higher the newer modes that are available if you are not comfortable. So first try and be comfortable with the ventilator and the mechanism before trying it. So let's come to the question and answers first. So I'll be just reading out the questions. There is Dr. Deepthi Bajaj who wants to know, sir, do we need special circuits for high frequency oscillatory ventilation?
Preferably. See, why do we need? Definitely, you need to use specialized circuits whenever you are using high frequency. The reason is that actually these circuits, the nature of these tubes are different. So as we're talking about delivery of a very high pressure and a very small tidal volume, so we want these tubes to be having the least compliance possible. That means they're not compliant, they're stiff tubes compared to the kind of tubes what we use in the conventional ventilation. So that there is no loss of pressure, or especially because these vibrations, right? These numerous vibrations. So actually, even though we are giving this much amount of pressure and this much amount of oscillations, if you look at the graphs, what happens down the lung, by the time it reaches the lung, there's a lot of dampening happening. We are delivering only this pressure and vibrations at the point of endotracheal tube. The moment as it goes down, there is a lot of dampening happening by the time it reaches the alveoli. But we don't want this to happen in the ventilator circuit per se. Whatever the machine produces should reach the endotracheal tube, right? So there should not be any loss. So these are the only the tubes are designed with less compliance so that there is no dampening happening in the tubes.
Okay, so we do need to use different tubings. Now, Dr. Amit Kumar wants to know why target ABGs in high frequency oscillatory ventilator ventilation is at alkalosis side.
Sorry, I don't get the question. So did I say that we need to target alkalosis?
I think in one of the slides it was mentioned, you had mentioned the target ABGs. I think they want, he wants to know about this. It was mentioned probably target pH was 7.4 or something. I don't remember the exact value. I think that is what.
I'm sorry if one of any of my slides have misled you. So let's be clear. We do not have what to say any pH in our mind when we're bringing in a high frequency ventilation, right? So most of the times, the reasons why we switch to high frequency is we are failing with our conventional ventilation. That's why I bring in a rescue mode. So the problem could be simply hardly we have problems related to the acid-base balance. Hardly there will be times where you are just going to bring in high frequency because you're dealing with acidosis or alkalosis, which you are not able to tackle. It is most of the times and primarily for either for a poor oxygenation in situations like a very bad lung or a severe PPHN or conditions like CDH, AirLeaks, whatever it is. Or rarely it may be because of problems in a CO2 elimination. So our primary targets are going to be only the oxygenation and the CO2 elimination. And this is primarily a respiratory problem, not a metabolic problem. And I am not aware of any advantages in following a particular, running behind a particular pH targets when we bring in high frequency.
So basically, we are targeting the same blood gases that we normally do.
Yes. Nothing special about no.
So it is not ultimately it is a target which we want to reach. So when we are not able to achieve by conventional ventilation, so we sometimes use a rescue therapy of high frequency. Okay, so Dr. Sachin Verma wants to know that ventilator-induced lung injury is a big problem with conventional ventilation, and HFO has advantages over conventional ventilation for prevention of ventilator-induced injury. So why we still not use HFO as a primary mode?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for bringing up the question. That's what even experts are breaking their heads. As a concept, this high frequency is very appealing. Going by the principles, very basic principles, very small tidal volumes, high rates, and all. And that is one of the reasons still why. So a very small number of units who are, I'll say, very rigorous followers or rigorous believers of this high frequency, they tend to use it as a primary mode. But the concerns seem to be primarily related to the distending pressure that we are using throughout. See, because when we talk about, whatever the numbers we talked about, choosing a number around the mean airway pressure, what you had in conventional ventilation, this strategy, please understand, this is a recommendation only for a rescue mode of ventilation. You won't be using this when you are going to use as because obviously when you say a primary mode, you would not have exposed the baby to a conventional ventilation. That this is going to be the first mode. So the ill effects are the major concerns are about this distension, the continued distension decreasing blood supply to the brain, leading to PVL or causing intraventricular, causing fluctuations in the CNS perfusion in the form of intraventricular hemorrhage, and also the little bit increased risk of air leaks that what we have noticed. The problems are there: air leaks, IVH, and possible PVL. These are the challenges. Definitely the CLD, if you look into the rates of CLD, even though the effect size is not so good, but the Cochrane still concludes the rate of CLD is somewhat better with elective high frequency when we compare conventional. Also, even the combined death and CLD, the edge is towards using high frequency. So we have been used to conventional ventilation for such a long time. We are quite comfortable, and we are experimenting with so many newer modes which are making this conventional ventilation much better over a period of time. So all that we can say is that high frequency is very appealing, but we don't have whatever the clinical evidence is available for high frequency. They are not so great to replace conventional ventilation as the primary mode. The reason for that, so that's a $1 million question. Maybe these limitations, what we talked about, are offsetting the benefits.
So basically, whatever evidence we have till now has not favored that it should be used as a first mode of ventilation. And although it has a potential benefit, but maybe down the lane, we find some evidence. Till now, more benefit has been in the pulmonary outcomes rather than on the overall outcome of the baby, especially the long-term neurodevelopmental outcomes we are still not clear about, increased incidence of PVL. So, yeah, so we still do not have an answer to the perfect mode of ventilation. Okay, so Dr. Amit Kumar wants to know how to titrate amplitude. How is titration amplitude based on PaCO2 levels? Is there any formula?
Titrating amplitude based on the formula. Okay. Again, as I said, I would like to go more in line with mean airway pressure. So hardly just we touch. So one thing is that for sure that we are not going to touch the frequency whenever we are facing a situation with CO2. The moment you do have more of an problem, whenever you have problems in CO2, either hypercarbia or hypocarbia, the first thing you need to look out is that, so do I have a problem in oxygenation as well? And I will be looking into the X-ray, obviously. Or am I dealing with an over-distended state? Amplitude is the primary parameter that you will be touching here. I'll just say, am I just remaining in this 2:1 ratio when compared to that of MAP? So if that is not in that line, obviously I will try to correct that factor. After ensuring that factor, it's more of a trial and error. There are some formulas available, but I'm not sure about the clinical utility of those formulas in titrating CO2. I'm aware of some formulas available where you just try to titrate or just say this is the amount of amplitude you should be decreasing. But clinically, so the application seems to be very low and it's more of a trial and error.
So I think there is no easy answer out. So we don't have a formula and apply and everything is out there. So there are a lot of things which we have to take into account before we change any settings. So Dr. Nargis wants to see other slides. I'm sure Dr. Mangala will be generous enough to share his slides, and probably Dr. Akash will be maybe sharing all the slides if the participants want more of the.
Yeah, sure, definitely.
So Dr. Mangala will be sharing it. Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Arun Edwin wants to know why paralysis is not advised in high frequency oscillatory ventilation.
Yeah, so in general, paralysis is not recommended in any form of ventilation. So it's not only for high frequency, even for conventional ventilation, we are not recommending paralysis. We know the paralysis is going to knock down the baby a lot. It is going to aggravate. It is going to interfere a lot with this various protective mechanisms in the baby. So whatever be the mode of ventilation, don't worry about high frequency. That question was brought out for people who might think that, so as I'm using very high descending pressures and I'm using this sort of vibration, can it be painful for the baby, or is it to bring in effective high frequency, do we need to use paralysis? So the answer is that paralysis is considered only in the extreme of situations where you are not able to move the lungs, whatever be the mode of ventilation. Only in that desperate situations we think about using paralysis. So there is no role of using a paralytic agent, whatever be the mode of ventilation, whether it is conventional or high frequency. It has been shown to be detrimental.
Yeah, so we hardly ever use muscle relaxant, but what about sedation?
Yeah.
Do we need to use sedation?
Yeah, sedation, again, a big controversy. Lots and lots of this no pain, neopain trials, use of routine sedation. Again, the evidence is not for using routine sedation in ventilation unless it is warranted. Warranted clinically, I'll say. If the baby is not comfortable, obviously you need to have sedate the baby. If you have to bring in a sedation to comfort the baby, you can consider. But just because you put the baby on a ventilator, so routine sedation is not recommended.
I think many people are using good amount of sedation when they are using high frequency. Not for the conventional ventilation, but many people are using good sedation for high frequency.
That may be because we are bringing in high frequency mostly as a rescue mode of ventilation. Yeah. That disease may be in an advanced stage. So that might warrant more pain relief.
Okay, so Dr. Gaurav wants to know, we are scared to use MAPs above 30. In your experience, what is the maximum MAP needed for an atelectatic lung?
No, I do agree, Dr. Gaurav. Hardly you have ever used, even you were saying about 30. We are worried about even crossing anything more than around 22, or when the number goes to that extent. So, so I'll be increasing the mean airway pressure only if I have not achieved lung recruitment or the lung is not inflated on the X-ray with that numbers. Hardly there will be a lung which doesn't get expanded at that pressures. So if you are failing beyond that, that means if your X-ray has shown the lungs have been opened up and still your oxygenation, if you look into the, what to say, one of the tables, it said, if you have a hyperinflation of the lung and if your oxygenation is low, you have to bring down the pressures. You should not be increasing the pressures actually. Again, over-destination can cause more troubles. But despite achieving optimal expansion, if you have problems in oxygenation, please don't run behind your mean airway pressure. Try to understand the disease in a better way. Maybe you're dealing with a different kind of disease where the problem is more in the pulmonary vascular system rather than in the lung. So that's where you need to consider, obviously, start using either nitric oxide or do bring in other measures to take care of that shunting. And you play with pulmonary pressures, you play with systemic blood pressures. You think about where the problem is and try to correct that problem. Simply raising the map, keep on raising the map is not a solution. Again, it's very dangerous.
And also, please watch out for the hemodynamics of the baby.
Sure.
That is also extremely crucial. Okay, so Dr. Gaurav wants to ask whether he wants you to please explain jet ventilation and for air leaks, HFOV versus high frequency jet ventilation.
Yeah, see, I don't have any personal experience with jet. I have never used any. I'm not aware of actually whether neonatal units in India having jet ventilation with them. So whatever units I have worked with oscillators. I have worked with what to say, what are the machines I had shown. All these machines I'm comfortable with. None of these have the high frequency jet. But as far as the literature review goes, in an air leak, definitely high frequency jet is advantages over high frequency oscillator ventilation.
Okay, so Dr. Boni wants to ask, so what settings do we keep for nasal HFB?
Yeah, nasal high frequency, we won't be using, again, the concepts are the same. That means nasal high frequency is something like a primary mode of support, right? So we can, I said the reverse. My brain is not working well. It is again something like so just the same analogy. You will be considering nasal high frequency only as a rescue mode of non-invasive ventilation. You are not going to use the nasal high frequency as a primary mode of non-invasive respiratory support. So if you have been operating on CPAP or you have been operating on NIMV, things like that, so you have a fair amount of idea about the mean airway pressures, what you are operating on. So again, you'll be starting with, as you are considering if your CPAP is not working or if your NIMV is failing, you don't want to intubate this baby also. That's where you bring in high frequency nasal ventilation. So the same, most of the time you will have problems in FRC. So you will start with a little bit 1 or 2 centimeters of water, higher pressures than the mean airway pressures, what you had in the previous mode of non-invasive ventilation. You will use again, same amplitude that is good enough to bring in wiggles up to the level of the umbilicus. Frequency is the same number almost. You don't just change the number for nasal. Just almost the same thing. The clinical scenario is different. And of course, the interface is different. Otherwise, it's almost the same.
So Dr. Gaurav wants to ask how to set psi breaths. Many times Drager asks us to use PIP-PWP ratio.
For the psi breaths? No, are you talking about the PIP and PWP ratio for the psi breaths?
I think he means that only. Many times Drager asks us to use PIP-PWP ratio. Dr. Gaurav, can you please explain your question again? Okay, so we move to Dr. Samarth Bohra. He wants to know, is BPD patient, in BPD patients, how to strategize settings to avoid breath stacking and BQ mismatch?
So I got VQ mismatch. What is the first one about? Breath?
In BPD patients, how to strategize settings to avoid breath stacking and VQ mismatch.
No, so I don't understand what you mean by breath stacking. No, sorry, I don't get that phrase.
Probably does he mean auto peep or something? I'm not sure.
So others can help me. This is new.
Dr. Samarth, you're unmuted. You can directly ask your question.
Yeah.
Yes, the thing is that when the ABG is not improving, then the tendency is to increase the respiratory rate. And what happens generally is that the one breath gets stacked over the other, and there is poor gas exchange. And definitely it is disproportional, to the finding. So VQ mismatch is there, ventilation perfusion mismatch is there. So generally in BPT patients, what are the basic settings one should aim for initially, and then how to go about modifying? Part of this you've already answered, sir, by saying that we need not focus on mean arterial
Are you
pressure.
asking specifically about high frequency?
Yes.
You are talking about BPD, other ventilation also in BPD.
How to strategize basically in a broadest perspective?
Yeah, but it's a difficult question because to be frank, I have hardly ever used high frequency on a baby who is suffering from bronchopulmonary dysplasia. We have listed the common conditions for which we use high frequency most of the times. But maybe just I can try to answer what I might be doing if I have to use for a baby on BPD. I'll simply go with the model like the BPD in most situations, pathophysiologically, it just behaves like meconium aspiration syndrome, what happens in term babies. So you might just, if you think that you are likely to develop air leaks, I think the challenge is in avoiding air leaks. At the same time, the airways are narrow. There is, you need to have something like a little bit higher PWP, what we call as an optimal PEEP. So that we need to find out. And the inspirator-expirator ratios, we definitely need to keep watch of. We have these two parameters, the choice of an optimal PWP and not compromising on the IA ratio, giving enough time for expiration will be a top priority. And obviously will be keep tracking of CO2.
And recruiting the lung well will also lead to a better VQ mismatch, better VQ. So now Dr. Boni wants to ask if we want to use VG mode with HFOV, how much tidal volume to set?
The tidal volume, when we talk about, when I'm saying VG, so we are talking about that, so minute ventilation. So you will just say, you choose the minute ventilation for a baby, like depending upon the size of the baby. So that should be the volume targeting you're talking about.
Okay, so Dr. Divya wants to know, does inline suction helps in HFOV to prevent de-recruitment, which happens briefly by routine suction?
Definitely. Inline suctioning is the preferred mode of suctioning. We are using high frequency if you have the facility and the resources available. But having said that, even if it is inline suctioning, even inline suctioning can lead to significant de-recruitment following the procedures. So even if it is an inline suctioning, as much as possible, try to avoid suctionings as much as possible when they use an high frequency.
Preferably inline suctioning should be used, but then as Dr. Mangala said, it just reduces, it doesn't eliminate the de-recruitment that occurs with each suctioning. So we have to minimize as much of suctioning as possible during HFO. So I don't think there are any more questions here. Okay, so all of us now know that high frequency ventilation is basically being used for rescue ventilation, but we must try and understand that what we are trying to avoid, that barotrauma, volutrauma, atelectotrauma, and biotrauma. But high frequency is also associated with lung injury. So they have, it is associated definitely with pneumothorax and pneumopericardium, pneumomediastinum, even pneumoperitoneum. So we must be aware that it is not that we are running away from the ill effects of conventional ventilation. So the high frequency ventilation will give us complete respite from that. So there is always a risk of lung injury also associated with high frequency ventilation. And as we said that although not much statistical benefits have been shown by high frequency, but all of us have been trying to optimize ventilation, and HFO has been one of those strategies. Coming to just one or two things I wanted to point out about practical aspects, that when we have finally decided to switch a baby on high frequency ventilation, and before we do that, what do we need to be careful about is that we should do a quick relevant examination, because many of the examination points we may not be able to assess after we start the child on high frequency, and we must ensure that the baby is euvolumic, because there may be the hemodynamic instability because of the high pressures. So if that is possible, if you need to give a bolus, fluid bolus, or if you want to start the baby on inotropes, in case that is required. And if an endotracheal, because we were talking about inline suctioning, so if you feel that suction is needed, please do it before you connect with the high frequency ventilator. And also remember to note the mean airway pressure. Most of the ventilators nowadays calculate it for you, so you really don't have to apply any formula. So if your ventilator gives it, so please see what the map was, because that will ultimately guide us to what map settings we need to put on the high frequency ventilators. Dr. Mangla, what do you suggest about clamping of the endotracheal tube when we remove the conventional ventilator and then we connect it to the high frequency oscillator ventilator? Do we need to clamp the tube so that there is no sudden re-recruitment?
Sorry, I never used that. I'm not aware whether anyone is using such strategy.
I've also not used, but I have read that some people are using that maneuver, that they put a clamp on the endotracheal tube and then they start the high frequency oscillator ventilator and then they connect it to the endotracheal tube and then they release the clamp, so that there is no de-recruitment in that process of shifting from the conventional ventilation to the high frequency oscillatory ventilation.
Actually,
yeah, but I think yeah, I do understand the concept behind it, but people have to be really quick. And the downsides, if they're going to take time,
and it doesn't make sense on conventional ventilation because there will not be recruitment properly. Because if you do during PWEP, there will be hardly any recruitment. It has to be very immediate within microseconds.
Yeah, but no. At the same time, we need to realize it's something like a complete tube block.
Exactly.
If lose time, then things might totally.
And it will lead to fluctuations in cerebral circulation also. So I think should not be practiced.
Yeah,
we have two, one from the panelists and one from the attendees. These will be the last questions. Dr. Valeria, you wanted to ask some question.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm a neonatologist from Italy. I just wanted to know what is your experience with the oscillatory ventilation in diaphragmatic hernia, and if it could be a first line choice in those patients.
Yeah, definitely congenital diaphragmatic hernia is one situation where we tend to move towards high frequency ventilation more often. So it is not that we are just using, in our unit, we are not using high frequency as a primary mode for all babies with diaphragmatic hernia, but we tend to use more high frequency in these babies. We definitely feel that actually high frequency is a better mode of ventilation in CDH, especially considering, and it has been shown beyond doubt, the combination of most of these babies will have a significant amount of pulmonary hypertension, and these babies will require inhaled nitric oxide also. The combination of HFO and nitric oxide has been found to be much superior by evidence also compared to nitric plus conventional ventilation. So there are many reasons